Protesters have been marching in cities across the nation to call for justice in light of the deaths of unarmed African-American men. First Michael Brown and now Eric Garner. This just seemed like I almost didn't pay attention to this case because it just felt like, oh, it's clear cut. It was, the autopsy ruled it as a homicide. Chief Bratton had come out and said, we definitely need to change our policies. It looked like it was an illegal chokehold that has been banned from police policy. So I didn't pay attention to it. I really just did not think it was going to go in this direction. I don't.
Right, and the fact that there was video showing the entire altercation seemed to make it a fairly open and shut case.
What do you think? Open and shut?
Well, I think it's pretty hard for individuals and citizens to second guess a grand jury that spent 2 months interviewing 50 people, and I think there was something like 23 different pieces of evidence submitted. And so, looking at a video, but reading a little bit about it on the internet, I don't think you have as much information as that grand jury did. And this was, a mixed race grand jury. And at some point, you have to kind of let the law play out. If you can't trust the law, then what kind of society do we live in?
When only 1% basically of police officers ever make it to trial, I see that as a problem. And the fact is, after the Trayvon Martin case, when I heard one of the jurors, at least get it to trial. Then, at least with Trayvon, it went to trial, and people they had to live with it. That there were people who, it was cross-examined. But, listening to one of the Trayvon Martin jury members say, well, I looked at the heart of George Zimmerman. I just know George came from a good place. I have a hard time believing that is a fair trial. Now, I know that's Trayvon, but I think that's what's happening. And these grand jury trials, there is no cross-examination, so why not just send it to the jury, especially when it's so controversial at this point?
The prosecutor has to make that decision, and the standard of proof in a grand jury proceeding is actually lower than in a trial. So basically, they conclude, we don't have enough evidence to bring this to trial. You can second-guess, career prosecutors, but I don't feel qualified to do that.
Well, they're definitely second-guessing in Ferguson, the prosecutor there, and his ties to the police.
Yeah, and that certainly has become one of these things where we're getting a lot of media coverage of selective events and certain parts of the case and certain parts of the aftermath. But the fact is, we don't know precisely, as opposed to what we saw in New York, we don't know precisely what happened in that altercation between the two in Ferguson, and so it was really hard to say.
Well, I'd say there's a big difference in Ferguson in that the grand jury proceedings were released in full. Legal scholars have said this was about as fair a proceeding as anyone could have asked for.
But when you look at the witnesses, there is some controversy.
Mm-hmm.
Some say, he did have his hands up, some say not. So take it to the jury.
Yeah, and
that's what I don't understand.
Almost all of the witnesses in the grand jury proceeding were African American too. And there was a conflicting testimony. In that particular case, what we do know is that he had just robbed a convenience store, he was carrying drugs, he was high on drugs, he went for the police officer's gun. You hear about these cases, and what makes me sad is, what about the cases where, and there was one just recently, where a police officer's gun was used against him and killed him? There's no protest for that. Because
police officers are held to a different level than common criminals. There has to be some accountability, and the problem here is there's no accountability that we're not.